In this episode, Mister, are the holes in the front of that gun different sizes? This looks like a problem. You know, some days you just can't get the range to yourself. Acroglass is coming. Dog bone being cut. Yep, there's the acroglass. Some stuff was bent on this thing. Holy crap! Huge ammo. Stand by for recoil. Hey, look at that. I finally got a range to myself. What in the heck is Mark doing with that? Notice anything different about this particular Westley Richards Cape gun? Well, what I noticed different about it is that the forend isn't on very well. And we need to figure that out. This needs to be conserved, but it's an odd duck. The story on this gun is that it was actually owned by an African professional hunter back in the day and actually took aim on the African continent. Let's get on down the rabbit hole, tear this thing apart, do some repairs to it, and shoot probably the recoillingest piece of gear you have ever seen. Here we go. So as we can see here, there is broken wood in here, but the forend is basically tight and it snaps down good and everything's pretty much there. Then when we take the forend off, you realize that the main issue is that has torn loose. So there's really two things that'll do one of these guns in. Solder on the barrels, things coming loose. And the barrels ring, so they're tight all the way down. I'm hoping I don't have to take the ribs all the way off this thing. And the other thing that gives these guns away is the wood. So where the recoil goes back into your shoulder, through here where the wood tightens up against the action, back in here where, you know, where the tang comes down. This gun's tight. I've noticed that it's been repaired once, and I'm sure there is a damn good story behind that. But that repair is actually pretty tight. You can see it, which is why I dye my acroglass black, but I digress. Where we're going to go from here is we've got to make sure that that doesn't have a cross section that goes like this. Because if this was slid in from the muzzles up to here and then soldered in, we're going to have a harder time doing this repair than if it's just shaped like that and it just sits down in. So let me get these barrels off, get this sling off this thing. We'll get it torn down and we're going to see what we got here, because this is the showstopper. This is obviously just instrumental stuff. We'll just pop through and acroglass that all in and just kind of try to make that look like it hadn't been repaired by a trained rat. I've shown you guys this before, but I want you to notice that what's coming out of the front end of this torch. You see that bloom of moisture there? That's going to burn us when we're trying to do a solder joint. Just remember that. I brought it up when we were soldering the ribs. I've already pulled this thing off. I heated it up and made sure that it would come apart. And part of what I want to show you guys is what the heck's underneath this rib. So we'll pop this out. We got lucky. It's that half wedge shape that I was talking about. You see all that rust? There's a lot of rust right here. There's rust on the front. So that's a couple of globs of solder, and the rest of this is just garbage. So the entire undersides of the rib look like this. We don't care. All we care about right there is that we can get all this dirt out of here and then come in and properly prep the sides of this joint set. We've got clean metal and it's tinned. We've got clean metal and it's tinned. And we're going to get lucky. We're not going to have to pull this piece of this rib off. So this is just going to be a straightforward plug and play. Now, like an electrical joint, you're not allowed, if you get a high resistance electrical connection, you're not allowed to just come in and crank up on a torque a little bit and think that because you tighten down on it, that the joint's not going to be high resistance anymore. You need to come in and completely detail all of this. So all this rust has got to get dug off of here. Globs. If somebody try to radio solder this thing back together again, we have to detail all of this, detail everything up in here, and just get rid of all this gack that's floating out of here. So this is turned sideways so we can look straight at it. I'm going to roll it up, and we're going to reset the camera angle then, and we'll go ahead and solder this thing back in. I'll show you what's involved.
Okay, Cape Gun 3.
So when this solder joint failed, it failed, and then it oxidized, and then it did all kinds of stuff. And the only way to get out of this, you can't just melt this. It doesn't work. In soldering, cleanliness is next to godliness. So we're going to prep this by mechanically removing this solder. We're just filing it off there. You see how that's starting to look a lot better? But we're not going to stop until this whole side is silver. Hey, if the last clip sounded a little bit weird, it's because we had a complete audio malfunction. We've got it cleared out, but I'm going to voice over this. Like an electrical connection, if you have a high resistance joint, you can't just torque it down. All this rust has got to go away. We've got to cut through this old solder and get down to shiny metal, and that's what we're doing here. We're prepping this, putting flux on it in order to exclude atmospheric oxygen, and then we're going to go ahead and heat it up. Now you see there's a lot of mass near the vise, and we don't want the fire to melt the solder. We want the heat in the mass to melt it. So we're pushing the fire up to the back and then wiping it off, and there it is. There's the tin surface. I'm getting a little bit more here just to make sure so I feel better about it. And then we'll flip it over and we'll do the other side. The barrel gets the same treatment. We've cleaned all the gack out of the bottom, and I don't care that there's flux going everywhere. This is just a field gun. So we're going to warm up one barrel at a time, and we're going to make sure that we don't heat up the top rib and get all of this fluxed in, and then while it's hot, all I got to do is melt the solder on the top piece, and you'll see when it melts here, it'll just drop right in. That cleanliness is next to godliness on a something else. Let's go outside. So the time to do your retests while you're... Yeah, all right. Are you done yet? I guess not. 12 gauge in this side. God bless. 577, 450 in this side, and the cigar goes in my mouth. Oh, look at that. Wrong trigger. I wasn't anticipating that at all. Black powder, baby. Let's get inside and take a look. Got it all turned down here before conservation. It wasn't that dirty. It did have a lot of patina on it. It just needed to be converted. There's a lot of screws bent, broken springs. This thing's been fixed before. There's a lot of things that are used to shim up. This is, after you pull everything off, you see all the gack that's hiding underneath, things that don't ordinarily get disassembled. Yeah, butt plate, butt trap. The engraving's still good. It's in good shape. It's just had the crap run out of it. Again, triggers, inside of the locks look good, and this is just very, very light loading. Note the bent firing pin in the upper right-hand corner. Well, I'll come back and show you more of that later because we took care of that. Epic express sights. Dare I say more? The solder joint is tight, did not slip, and is holding the forend iron, so I'm going to call that a successful solder joint. Now that we've got the parts converting in the other pot, let's take a look at what's going on up here. There's a glue repair right here. You can see the glue. And in fact, I'm going to unrig this and re-rig it so you can see I scratched through it. And this is some kind of 1950s like Duco or something. I don't know. They glued this. Someone did that. Okay, so now we're going to re-rig here and see if I can go back to where Bruno had me, and I'm right on a mile. The problem with these four-finger guns, they checked off the brake going that way, but did not check off this brake. You can see it's moving ever so slightly. It's stiff, but it's not haul and recoil. The recoil of this gun, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this thing looks like a splitting maul. Let me get the light over there. if you look at this and I rotate it, those two wings right there, the recoil loading is trying to split this stock that way, like somebody's putting a maul on it and just banging on it. This is poor architecture, but it's how guns were made back then. And I call them 4-finger guns. So there's 4 fingers up there, ignore my pinky. There's 4 fingers holding the recoil. 1, 2, 3, 4. Every Parker, every LC Smith fails up here, and then eventually they fail down here because it just can't take the splitting load. It just pulls it off to one side. So this has been repaired, but we're gonna have to go a little bit further. We can see there we got a little bit of movement there. I don't think there's much we can do about it, because by the time you're done inletting in that way, in over here, by the time you're done inletting this lock in, there's not a whole heck of a lot of wood left in that. And then as the receivers started getting bigger and bigger, you had garbage, which is every LC Smith. I'm sorry, everybody, you know, that collect LC Smiths, but what you have is a farm implement, and there are varying grades of farm implement. Anyway, back to this Westley Richards. At the prevailing time, I need to tie this grain to this grain, so it's dog bone time again. And we're going to lay a dog bone across this. Now, you could make the comment that I'm going to remove more wood to put this dog bone in that I'm going to gain in strength. But somehow I failed to see how laying a 40 or 50,000 pound tensile strength screw across this gap and then turning this whole thing into acroglass fails to add strength. I don't know. Well, all right. We'll do that. We'll have to inlet down below. This is the actual operating lever that unlocks the gun. Has to lay here so that this will have to go down below that. All right. So then, this is the other repair we're going to do right here. And we're just going to take a brass tack. Really, guys? Come on. No one will see that. It'll be indiscreet. Oh, look. There looks like one, too. See that hole? So we're just going to black acroglass this up. Crunch all this together. File it down. Try to make it look right. Clean up the inletting. As this had been sanded or worn down, this spot up in here needed to be kind of banged out. Inside of it looks like it was ate up by a trained rat. I've never understood Muller borders, but God, this thing's got them in spades. So we'll clean this up. Then the other thing I want to clean up, if we have any extra acroglass, is the back end of this Carcano that had been fixed with a wooden stick here. They pounded it down in. The repair is good, but it's slightly loose. And in this case, we're going to do this one first, because while the glass is still clear, we're just going to put a little bit in the back, a little bit up in the front, rub it in, and then bang this down again just to keep it from moving. But it's been repaired, and you're not going to hide that. So we're not going to hide it. We're just going to keep it from coming the rest of the way apart. And then finally, this Israeli heavy FNFAL handguard. There's just a big crack in there. We're just going to check that off. They had put this corrugated reinforcement on the end grain of this, and well, we see where that went. It just meant all the pieces stayed together. You start seeing the oil sweat out of this, a little bit of smoke. My plan is to cut down until the shaft touches off. So I plan on coming down until the shaft lands, and that's how deep I want to go. Like that. So this whole thing has to be below this step right here. Here's the top of the step and here's the bottom of the groove. So we're going to go ahead and keep cutting that and probably cut the heads off this. So let me do a quick cut here. So what I've just done now is cut the head off that, and that drops right in. I've just got to go in a little bit deeper. So we'll just keep cutting here until we come down flush. And you see we're pretty much touching the bottom right here. So then the question becomes, how do I go deeper? And the answer for how to go deeper is to just switch over to a drill bit. Now that we have delineated the proportions of this slot, we'll just we'll start cutting down in with a drill bit, and we'll just punch in here until we get what we want. Nice and uniform. I could use a stop on this, but by the time I rig all that, you guys will be bored. I got to reach my hand around this. Now while we're doing this, we're accumulating sawdust in this crack here. So we got to make sure when we're all done, we open that crack up and we blow that sawdust out. Okay, now we're sitting down below. Just a little bit of cleanup. We'll mix up some acroglass and we're golden here. So the prep's done on the stock now. We got to get to this thing. We're just going to pull this chip off. See, and that was a brass tack. Let's see if we can run that out. All right. Yeah, this is a disaster. It's got pieces of checkering in it. And there was a little thin sliver that popped off right before Bruno turned the camera on. That little thin sliver, we got to remember. See where this is shiny here? It's going to go right there. So now we've prepped. You know, I'll take a look and make sure there isn't too much oil here, but it actually looks like naked walnut all the way through, and I don't know how we got away with that. That should have been black and oil filled. So this is ready. The stock's ready, and we've got Bruno's stock ready. I'm just going to mix up some acroglass, and we'll see you right back on this camera angle. I'm getting all these surfaces here because I've made the decision to glass bed the head of this thing while I'm at it. And I'll have to go back in and cut all that area out for that latch. We'll have to be right there somewhere. So I've previously mold released this thing and filled in all the cracks where the acroglass can stick with modeling clay. For you metric guys, that's plasticine. All right, we're gonna have to put in the reinforcement here. And let's just tuck that down in there with the stick so that I can't grab either end of it. We'll push this all the way to the bottom. So now we have tied both sides of this stock together, and we will have to come in and grind out the recess for the locking block, and I know that. Chance we'll just have to take and we'll grind it out. I don't want to set that part down in there. I don't want to mount it, because then if we trap it in this acroglass, we're in a real world of hurt. So I put some glass up around the head, bottom. And this isn't going to be a real hardcore glassing. I'm not trapping this. I'm not doing the bottom metal. I'm just giving this thing a little bit of help. So we'll slide that up in there, and I'll just run that down like that until it stops skating. And we will leave that alone. I'll just put that down there. Let me make sure I got that right. Okay. And there it's going to set. Now I'm going to take it off the vise and move it over to one of my other drying stations, and we'll let that cure. And be very, very careful when we set this thing that we don't lean it one way or the other. It'll start sliding on you, so it's got to be vertical. I'm gonna roll that up. Hey, I keep getting asked, what is this? This is an industrial carpet pad. It's felt from underneath an industrial carpet. So get me up right here. All right, brother. Yeah, outstanding. Okay. So the reason why I'm putting this way is so that this is relatively level, so that this piece that we're going to glue on won't skate off the world on us. I'm just going to rub this in. This thing looks like it was checkered by a trained rat with a sharpened salad fork, because this isn't the original Westley Richards checkering. The checkering on this thing was augmented by someone. It's got a chuckle out of Josh over there, because it's kind of funny, actually. All right. I'm just buttering a piece off camera here. And so we got those horizontal lines right there. And we got the horizontal lines right there. So we're just going to line all this up here and nail it in. Now, no reinforcements through this. I'm not running any wood pegs through. I would really like to not have to completely redo this forend, because I don't want to redo the gun, because it's already been done once. The gun has already been recheckered one time, and I would really like to not have to be back in that boat. So this is that little sliver that came out. I know you can't see through my hands, but I'm shoving all that back up in there, and I'm just hoping to God all this kind of lines up. We're going to smear that out, and this is all going to get a good sand in when we're done. All right. There we go. This is a mess. Vinegar does a very, very good job of cleaning up uncured acryglass, if you ever cared to know about that. All right, so we're going to leave that kind of set up, and I know this looks it looks bad. It looks bad because it is bad. Right about now, I should light the bat signal and call for some help here, because I'm just getting waxed. Okay, hold on, we're there. It's not as precise as you would think. Now, this piece of wood that's missing, you could either take that piece of wood and make another piece and try to do it. We're going to cheat and see if we can fill most of that in with a blob of acryglass, and that'll just be a black sliver, and it'll look like grain when I file it all off later. There we go. So I've just committed, because I've gotten some glass in the checkering, I'm going to chase all this out. It'll look good when we're done. You'll almost not know I was there. I already did Bruno's stock. I just tacked a little bit of clear in there and knocked that back down with the nail right there. I knocked it down, so that piece is an obvious repair, and we're not trying to hide it. So I did that, and then there's a dowel there, and you can see it was a tapered dowel, and it was actually a pretty decent repair. Needless to say, that screw did not have a lot to bite on. So now the upper butt plate screw is in the repair. That's a little dodgy. There's one other repair we're going to do here while we have the acryglass. And I'm just going to have Bruno bring the camera up here and move it over. There's a chip that got blown off the back end of this. It's a big old chip of wood missing right here. Can you see where my index finger is? We're going to glue that chip back on when we've got that entire tub of acryglass. Anyway, that's what I wanted you to see here. The rest of it's just, a long rifle under construction. Josh wanted to know how to build one of these things from scratch, and he's actually doing a pretty darn good job of it. So when he blew his chip off, I told him to put it in a bag, and I'll take off the butt plate and you'll be able to see it. Keep going. Okay. Got that off. Got that. You see where it blew right here. And the grain on this, let me get my hand behind it, that'll make it look better right there. So the grain on this stock is really brash, and what you really want to look for in grain, and I know I'm way off topic here, you want the grain to be straight down at the bottom and run out at the top. We covered that when we fixed the chip on Bruno's Argentine Mauser. Well, anyway, I'm gonna glue that. There's a couple little places on this thing where wood is flecked up that we're gonna take care of it. He's doing a very, very good job of saving a destroyed stock. All right, we're gonna get back to the main topic here. Talk to you in a bit. This Carcano is not a Westley Richards, but I'm gonna tell you what, Bruno just got done digging copious amounts of gack off of this thing and it looks great. However, that's not what we're doing. What we are doing is this beauty. Oh my, check that noise out. Here we go. Special Steel and Westley Richards. Let's look at it this way. So after it converted out, that nice brown color disappeared. We have the pop-up sights with the silver linings on them. Anyway, this converted out well, but that's what I really want you to see is how smooth and tight this solder joint is. Total fill here, fill up underneath, and we popped that round out of it just to make sure it wasn't going to pop off. I knew it wasn't, but when I shot that, yeah, we were kidding around a little bit, but you may have noticed that I had the butt plate in my elbow to let the whole thing rock, and that's because I didn't want to load the wood, because I didn't know about the wood yet, but I wanted to check that repair. As we began to take this thing apart, the entire sweater began to unravel. So I came back in here and did the Acraglass repair, filled in that channel right there. Let me get this glare out of our hair. There we go. And glued that chip back on, recut the teeth, kind of chased the checkering back out a little bit. There's not much I can do about somebody's overrun. I'm not, this isn't a complaint, but you can see here where the two tack holes used to be, there and there. There's so much oil in this thing, and I'm not making this up, that in order to refinish this, I just took my thumb and I ran it and I got it hot and enough oil sweated out of this wood that it just took it back down to its finish again. So from a couple of feet away, that actually looks okay. It looks like it is. Couple other things to point out. Somebody's been in here with a checkering tool. This is supposed to be flat top checkering, so you can see where they ran a line right there. It gets really bad over here. And I'll clean this out if that's what Eric wants. If that's what the owner wants, I'll go back in and tighten this up. But that wasn't my charter. My charter was to stop the problem on the bottom of the barrel. When we got up, you saw the head of the stock was all messed up. This is what it looks like cleaned up. We've acraglassed, and then I've opened up the area for this plate to come out as the gun comes open. You see how that plate's standing just proud of the receiver there? So we need a spot into which for it to come. When we glassed all that up, tightened it up, put that dog bone across it, the whole stock tightened up to the point where, hear that bouncing? Stocks that aren't tight don't bounce like that. If there's cracks and stuff, it'll absorb all of it. We found that this hammer, that hammer looked, you see, let me get you straight down on it. You see how that hammer looks straight? Not before. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So we got that hot, and hot bent that because it had been cold bent when it dropped. Now when it was bent, it scabbed up the nose of this hammer pretty well, and it actually cut it off at an angle. You see how it's sliced at an angle there? We'll deal with all that. But that meant that the one firing pin that it was hitting was bent, and here's the pair before I straightened it. And here we go afterwards. So we'll see. We'll put all this together. We'll take a look. I noticed a couple of things. I had to cut some material off this other hammer over here, cut this here, and I had to swap the firing pin side for side because this gun is old enough now. When I pull the trigger and this hammer comes down, it comes forward and it hits that. And that's the protrusion on that, and that's barely 30 thou, and I'm hoping that's going to be enough to touch this left barrel off. It might not, because the head of this firing pin has been mushroomed a little bit. And the left one will come down, and that's giving me plenty. That's about 45 or 50, and that sounds about right. Shotgun on this side, and the rifle on that side. Now, when you don't have the triggers pulled, these are locked. And when the trigger is pulled, this can come all the way down and hit. And then it will, when you turn your finger loose, it'll come back and lock back. So this does two things. It retracts the firing pins out of the primers, and it also means that this gun's trying to give you a fighting chance if you drop it, that this won't just come up and slap the primer in the ass here. Bottom metal had a kind of just a weird hanky bend in this thing. So when this gun got bent and it started to come apart, recoil forces were beginning to rip this thing to shreds. We cleaned up a couple of screws, and I cleaned up every one but this. So as the stock broke and everything was starting to move, this is the top bolt right here. And as I rotate this, you can see that there's a little bit of a hink in that. It's kind of going around like this. Here we go. See that? So that bend, as the stock let go, it actually bent this bolt. I'll just pinch it here in aluminum jaws and give it a little tap and move it over, and we'll straighten that back out again. But pretty much all that's left to do now is put this thing back together again, and we're going to go back outside and recoil load it. And I'm going to talk about the ammo for this thing, because the ammo for this sucker is epic. The right barrel is 12 gauge. It's just straight up 12 bore, and we've loaded some ammo for that. The left barrel is running this 577 450, and I'm going to tell you what, I loaded these for the Citadel's History of Firearms class, and because, well, they're cadets, and cadets should experience the joys of big bore black powder recoil, I managed to get 109 grains underneath a 600 grain slug. That slug comes down to here, and I'm going to tell you what, this is pretty much it, the A+ Ultra. Remember that glue job that we did on Josh's long rifle? Let's see if that holds up. That would be yes. And now you get to deal with me. 577 450, 12 gauge, black powder. So now it's time to recoil load this thing. The wood on these old guns dies long before the metal dies. We know that we got that solder joint right, and it's going to hold. So what we're going to do is, one at a time, make sure the sears hold. We did some serious hammer work. We did some work here. So we'll load the right barrel but cock both. That proves a couple of things. One, that it'll go off. Two, that our firing pin protrusion was adequate. And three, that hammer stayed cocked. That's important, because if you double this thing, the recoil energy is epic. So now we'll load a 577 450 and cock both hammers. That was epic. And I'm going to tell you what, those things have a lot of recoil. But importantly, the right hammer stayed cocked. In order to open the gun, though, the right hammer has to be forward. Well, so much for not having enough firing pin protrusion, because I'm going to tell you what, that sucker spanked it. So now that we know that the hammers will hang, we're good. This thing is still tight. Solder joint hasn't broken loose. These are all the things we're looking at when we're retesting old guns like this. Yeah, that's interesting. I got one more retest to do for a guy in the building, and he just asked me to see if this thing would work. So all I got to say is this: America.